It's nearing the end of the school year, I'm busy grading papers, prepping makeup exams, and whatnot, and you guys just had to go and vote for Conjuration. Welcome to the third installment of the Hatsu level series, this time featuring, by popular demand, Conjuration. I'll spare you the general preamble from here on out, so if you are perchance a new viewer that stumbled across this video, to get a better understanding of what I'll be discussing here, my advice is to first start with a mission and then work your way back here. But you do you. Now, while I will be sparing you the Hatsu level series preamble, before we can begin properly delineating and rating various Nen mechanics innate to Conjuration, I first need to go over a very strange aspect of it as a category, which I've never had the chance to discuss before, but have to now. See, unlike the other four regular categories, Conjuration doesn't have any generic low-level mechanics. As in, enhancement is responsible for strengthening one's body, mind, and aura. It's a must in general, but especially for any kind of Nen combat. Emission is necessary for separating Nen from one's body. If you're detaching aura from yourself and it's still maintaining its form and functionality, you're using emission by definition. If you want to shape or alter your aura in any way, you're utilizing transmutation by default. And if you want to control your detached aura or anything infused with it, there's no other category apart from manipulation able to achieve that. All these categories exhibit defining low-level mechanics, which, while being innate to them, are also essential for the functioning of the wider Nen system. Conjuration simply hasn't been shown to have these generic mechanics. As in, while enhancement, emission, transmutation, and manipulation facilitate the functioning of the wider Nen system through their innate mechanics, Conjuration is an island which neither directly offers anything nor requires anything. Now, while Biscuit's advice to Killua in chapter 146 that he should alternate practicing transmutation and enhancement with transmutation and conjuration heavily implies that there are such things as pre-Hatsu conjuration training exercises, and therefore mechanics, since they were never shown, we can only guess at what they may actually entail, and whether Conjuration has any innate mechanics essential for the wider functioning of the Nen system. In the same vein, enhancement, transmutation, emission, and manipulation do. Whatever those unknown low-level mechanics innate to Conjuration Killua was instructed to practice are, should be considered at level 1 with regards to complexity, supposing they are enough to actually create, or at least aid in creating, a Hatsu proper. But since we don't have any info on them, I won't waste time speculating. Oh, by the way, don't confuse Izunabe's conjuration training exercises for Conjuration's baseline mechanics. Kurapika was specifically training to conjure chains, which would be the same as Killua training specifically to transmute electricity, and not equivalent to him and Gon doing generic transmutation training like aura shaping or generic enhancement training like rock breaking. This lack of obvious fundamental mechanics has actually shown itself to be a significant obstacle to breaking down and determining the true nature of conjuration, and thus complexity of some conjuration-based abilities, specifically and most prominently conjured objects, the issue of which can best be illustrated through Kurapika's many chain-facilitated abilities. Tell me, is a conjured object capable of exhibiting supernatural effects by simply being assigned the appropriate limitations and pledges? Or are conjured objects primarily facilitators for supernatural effects made possible mainly through other categories? To talk specifics, does Kurapika's chain jail utilize manipulation to induce a state of Zetsu in the Phantom Troop members he captures with it? Or is this supernatural effect accomplished solely through his severe limitation that the ability can only be used against a very specific group of people, and pledge that he would die should he use it on anyone that isn't a part of it? To expound on that latter idea further, can a conjured object, through appropriate limitations and pledges, be imbued with supernatural properties that are intuitively informed by the object's conceptualized functionality? In other words, since Kurapika conceptualizes chains as something with the function of restraining evildoers, in order for it to better perform said function, he imbues a specific chain with the limitation that it can only be used against a very specific group of evildoers, and adds onto it the pledge that he will die should he ever use it against anyone outside of this very specific group, thus imbuing it with a supernatural capacity to force those it is meant then to be used against in a state of Zetsu, in an effort to maximize the intended function of restraint. After all, a restrained Nen user that can still use their Nen cannot in truth be considered restrained. As such, the supernatural effect would in this case be considered an extension of the conjured object's intuitively conceptualized nature and functionality, and not an instance of applied manipulation. While I initially favored this conception of conjuration and wrote a good fourth of the script with it in mind, I've come across two big problems. 1. Where's the cutoff point? With Kurapika's chains, it's rather simple. Chains restrain, a Nen user that can use Nen cannot be considered as being truly restrained, thus a state of Zetsu is enforced. But what about Shizuku's Blinky or Owl's Fun Cloth? Vacuum cleaners suck in and store objects for later disposal, which is what, for the most part, Blinky does, just taken to supernatural levels through the limitation that it cannot suck in Nen constructs or living beings. Does this mean that Blinky doesn't utilize transmutation to shrink the non-living matter it sucks in so they can fit inside it? For example, one intended function of vacuums is a form of storage, after all. So would this hypothetical shrinking effect simply be that functionality taken to supernatural levels, and under this purview, entirely facilitated through conjuration, limitations, and pledges, i.e. without evoking transmutation? Owl's Fun Cloth amounts to the same thing, since it's just serving its purpose of a magician's aid, making objects seemingly vanish only to make them reappear later. Is Fun Cloth entirely conjuration-based, or does it utilize manipulation or transmutation to make its shrinking effect possible? The ambiguity of when an effect is, too supernatural to be possible solely through conjuration, limitations, and pledges, and when another category needs to be evoked, makes it seem more elegant to simply assume almost all supernatural properties conjuration-based abilities exhibit are accomplished through the effects of other categories which conjuration facilitates. 2. There aren't enough examples of cases such as Kurapika's chain jail. Even his own holy chain was confirmed to be a conjuration-facilitated but enhancement-based ability. Now, this would easily be explainable by the fact that while chains are meant to restrain, they are not meant to heal. Hence why holy chain cannot heal through pure conjuration. However, would this mean that a conjured object, which can indeed have healing properties, such as a first aid kit, let's say, could mend and heal wounds without relying on the category generally associated with such effects, i.e. enhancement? I don't think so. This hypothetical conjured first aid kit would still serve as a facilitator for an enhancement-based ability, just like Kurapika's holy chain, but would potentially be a baseline better facilitator for a healing ability, since it's more functionally compatible with healing and wound closure than a chain in the simple shape of a cross. As such, going forward, I'll be viewing conjured objects as primarily being facilitators of effects of other categories, on the assumption that a Hatsu created by a conjurer at the very least increases in force and accuracy if it is facilitated by a conjured object, even if that object isn't ideally functionally compatible with the effect in question, such as Pika's holy chain. With all that said and established, let's actually get into the goddamn topic of this goddamn video, shall we? At a baseline level 1, we have object conjuration. As established earlier, since we've yet to see a simpler conjuration mechanic, this is the baseline simplest application of conjuration. However, despite this, I believe it should at least already be equivalent to transmutation's innate mechanic of advanced aura transmutation, for example, which is at a baseline level 2, meaning that judging by what we know and have seen thus far, conjuration skill floor is significantly higher than that of the other regular categories. As such, a level 1 conjuration-based mechanic or ability should immediately be considered as reasonably more complex and thus more difficult to learn and master than an enhancement, emission, transmutation, or manipulation-based one. Since I've already talked plenty about him, let's start things off with a Kurapika lightning round. The reason why he can have so many abilities without suffering from a Castro-like NEN memory overload is because A. He uses the innately simplest application of conjuration, namely object conjuration, to facilitate his abilities. B. He's a conjurer. C. His abilities are facilitated by the same object, namely chains. And D. He has some quite stringent limitations and pledges which serve to mitigate an ability's toll on his memory load. For example, while Chain Jail can only be used against PT members at the risk of death, both it and Stealth Dolphin can only be used while he's receiving a boost in force through Emperor Time, his pseudo-specialist mode which reduces his lifespan by 1 hour for each second he spends in it. Now, to tackle each ability in turn. Chain Jail relies on basic conjuration as well as mid-level manipulation in order to forcefully induce Zetsu in a captured PT member, making it a solidly level 4 Hatsu. Next, we have Judgment Chain, which utilizes basic conjuration, manipulation, and emission in order to work. Yes, emission as well. This was outright stated by Pika in chapter 108. Just like Machi's transmuted threads become significantly weaker as soon as they leave her fingers, so do Kurapika's chains. This tells us that, in order for a conjured object to sustain its effects regardless of range while embedded in another person, such as it did with Crollo, necessitates basic but potent emission in order to function. Hence why it can initially only be used while Kurapika is getting Emperor Time's boost to his force, since emission is his opposite category. Please note that while conjured objects are in a sense real and can maintain their forms, they are nonetheless aura constructs. If they weren't, Kurapika couldn't in his chains, for example. Meaning that since conjurers have only a 40% proficiency in emission, very particular limitations and pledges must be made in order for a conjured construct to maintain its form and functionality while far away from the user. Another way is to make it parasitic, but let's not get into a tangent now. Due to its implementation of basic emission, potency does not matter for complexity, as well as mid-level manipulation to induce the curse-like effect through a manipulation mechanic I'll go into when I eventually cover manipulation, I'll be putting Judgment Chain at a level 5. Holy Chain is an enhancement-based but conjuration-facilitated healing Hatsu, which I'd put at a strong level 3, since I conceptualize pure healing as a rather low-level mechanic of enhancement. Steel Chain is an emission-based conjuration-facilitated ability that allows Kurapika to temporarily siphon off and store a target's aura and ability. Now, this would be basic conjuration paired with some moderate level emission, and since Kurapika is a conjurer, we know that without sufficient limitations and pledges, he can't utilize emission mechanics higher than a level 4, meaning that aura/Hatsu siphoning has to be a level 4 emission-based mechanic in its own right. As such, this would put Steel Chain at a moderate level 5. Stealth Dolphin can only be conjured while Kurapika is in ET, and allows him to analyze and then either use or loan to someone an ability taken via Steel Chain. Now, temporarily transferring an ability onto yourself or someone else is an even more innately complex application of emission, which I'd put at a solid level 6. The only reason Kurapika is able to use an ability which should be impossible for a conjurer like himself is due to the aforementioned steep condition that it can only be used while he's in ET, along with the fact that unlike with Judgment Chain, he cannot undo ET until the stolen ability is used, which has already caused him to lose a significant portion of his lifespan at a dizzyingly quick pace. I'd put Stealth Dolphin by itself at just about a level 7. Last and most aneurysm-inducing, we have Dowsing Chain. I have no idea how this works, genuinely. I won't get into the nitty-gritty, but Kurapika himself isn't quite sure how it works either, but tries to explain it by suspecting that he can unconsciously tell whether someone is lying or telling the truth based on their micro-expressions. See, that'd be pretty cool if all it did was allow Pika to discern lies. But how the hell is he able to divine someone's position through it? How that's in any way explainable is beyond me. And please bear in mind, Kurapika does try to explain the truth-dowsing portion of it, meaning that he doesn't think it's just NEN magic or whatever. If you've got any ideas, I'd genuinely like to hear them. My brain is already fried as is. Next, we have Owl and his fun cloth. It's a conjured cloth that allows him to shrink anything enveloped in it, people included. While there's a few ways you could interpret this, I'm choosing to go with the route of this being a conjuration-facilitated but transmutation-based ability. Shrinkification would be a specific offshoot and application of total body/object transfiguration, which is a baseline level 6 transmutation-based ability. As a conjurer with an 80% proficiency in transmutation, this would be an entirely viable ability for Owl, hence why it didn't come with any apparent limitations. Overall, I'd put the ability at a strong 7, considering he can shrink both objects and people. Let's now quickly cover Padale and his fistful of weapons, which allows him to transform his right hand into a variety of weapons, including, but not necessarily limited to, a hammer, a drill, and an axe. All three of these are quite simple and would together constitute a level 1 Hatsu. However, instead of just conjuring the damn things, Padale, for whatever reason, transforms his hand into them. This necessitates body/object malleability, which is a baseline level 3 mechanic of transmutation. By the way, I realized while rereading the script that I never actually told you what level I thought it was in the transmutation video. Sorry about that. Why he does this instead of just conjuring the damn things, I'm not really sure. It could be just his idiosyncratic way of limiting himself to conjuring only one weapon at a time. In any case, he never properly trained to develop the ability, as he awakened it through Morena's contagion, making any further analysis of it a fool's errand. I'd put Fistful of Weapons at a strong level 3. Then we have Genthru and his Countdown. Countdown is a conjuration-facilitated but transmutation-based ability that conjures a bomb on a victim whom Genthru had before physically touched, while saying the word bomber, and then explained his abilities to. Countdown is then armed to explode in 6,000 of the target's heartbeats. The explosion is, of course, accounted for by substance transmutation, which, while being a baseline level 3 transmutation mechanic, is a level 5 in Genthru's case, since transmuting aura into explosions is quite complicated in my opinion. Now, when he first saw it, Ebengane, whom we'll talk about in a bit, explained how Countdown implies that Genthru is very well versed in both emission and manipulation, implying that those two categories were a part of it. So, emission I get. It's the same principle as Kurapika needing to tap into it for his judgment chain to remain active while cursing Krollo. And since both it and Countdown were actually exercised by the same person, namely Ebengane, it's safe to assume they must operate under similar enough principles and mechanics. Where Abe got manipulation from, though, is beyond me. What, because it's tied to the victim's pulse? That's silly. It's possible he was just mistaken or had some reason for lying, but I can't think of any halfway decent reason why Countdown necessitates manipulation, so I'll be entirely ignoring it. If you've got any ideas, please feel free to share. Now, very quickly, I want to emphasize just how much emission Countdown necessitates. Genthru was able to arm 30 plus bombs at once, which were capable of maintaining their full effectiveness regardless of distance. That's a lot for a single Nen user, let alone one of Genthru's caliber. The lack of any range limitations, Countdown's potency, Genthru stated it was 10 times more powerful than Little Flower, paired with a high volume of bombs that could be armed and maintained at once, all make me think that Countdown isn't solely Genthru's ability, but was a symbiotic or otherwise collaborative ability made possible through the assistance of Sub and Bara. Note that while being at a level where they should definitely have a Hatsu of some kind, neither of them showcased their abilities, which to me implies that all their effort and Nen memory went to making Countdown possible. It was only by all three of them joining thumbs that they were able to detonate Countdown prematurely. Plus, despite being sadistic, conniving bastards, they showcase genuine care for and trust in one another, and creating a collaborative ability like this would have deepened their mutual trust and codependence. Not to even get into the whole Bara and Sub naming scheme. I'm actually pretty hard set on this notion and have been for a while now. Due to its multi-categorical complexity, I'd put Countdown at a very strong level 7, if not even an 8. Finally, let's discuss the character that truly embodies object conjuration. See, while the vast majority of the aforementioned characters utilize basic conjuration to create specific objects and imbue them with supernatural properties innate to other categories, thus adding to the multi-categorical complexity of their Hatsu, this character taps into the very essence of object conjuration to create a far more innately complex ability than any mentioned thus far. I'm talking about none other than my man Kurapika and his Gallery Fake. Gallery Fake allows Kurapika to copy an object with his left hand and then conjure a perfect replica with his right. While he can only create non-living and non-supernatural constructs, he can copy living beings, which come out lifeless, or non-constructs, which come out without retaining any of their supernatural properties. Furthermore, the copies are so perfect that if he copies a person, for example, he copies everything. Skin, muscle, bone, organs, blood vessels, nerves, everything is perfectly copy-pasted. The limitations of this ability, apart from the fact that his copies are non-living and do not retain their supernatural properties, is that they do vanish after 24 hours. However, another big bonus is that they do function as an extension of his N. And since he stated he was capable of conjuring as many as 50 copies of the troop's building-size hideout, this makes him possibly the only human able to come anywhere close in approaching the size of Pito's N, which could span as much as a few kilometers. The only other category Gallery Fake would be relying on would be emission, since as we established, it is required for conjured objects to retain their form and functionality, though Kurapika doesn't really care about functionality, over long distances, and since he can seemingly copy as many objects as he wants, this is probably balanced out by the 24-hour limitation. All in all, due to its capacity to copy any object perfectly, I'd put Gallery Fake at a level 5, just based on its innate complexity, while its long-range capabilities and N push it to a very strong 6. Despite his lack of combat prowess, Kurapika was designated as natural on the Nen proficiency chart, i.e. on the same level as Uvo, Hisoka, and Chrollo, so the ability level does complement that at least. We finally move on to Conjuration's baseline level 2 mechanic, Nen Beast Conjuration. Just like with emitted ones, conjured Nen Beasts, apart from being innately more complex to manifest than objects, also exhibit almost inherent multi-categorical complexity, as manipulation is a vital part of creating a Nen Beast, since without it, to animate them, you might as well have conjured an object instead. As such, while their innate complexity may be at a level 2, due to the added multi-categorical complexity, you can view conjured Nen Beasts as being at a baseline level 3. Now, the question I've gotten quite a few times throughout the years is, what's the difference between conjured and emitted Nen Beasts? And while I'd very much like to get into it here, this video is already way too long as is, so I'll be sure to cover that specific topic in a follow-up video very soon. For now, I'll simply say that just like conjured objects, conjured Nen Beasts primarily serve as conduits or facilitators of abilities innate to other categories. Then we have Kite and his crazy slots. This is a quirky one since it's both a conjuration-facilitated and conjuration-based ability. Crazy slots allows Kite to conjure a Nen Beast named the Mad Clown, whose sole purpose, apart from annoying Kite, is to semi-randomly decide which of his 9 potential weapons will be conjured. I say semi-randomly since Jing implied that Kite would spin a particular number if he deemed that he was truly in imminent mortal danger. Apart from this randomness limitation, there's also another which requires of a weapon to be used before the clown can spin again. Both of these relatively stringent conditions are there not only to boost the individual power of each weapon, but to most likely reduce the Nen memory toll so many different conjured weapons would normally cause in a user. The large number of potential weapons may arguably even serve to add on risk, since some weapons, like the Scythe, seem really specialized for doing one specific thing, and could prove borderline unusable if Kite got it while in a crowd of civilians. Now, unlike Kurapika's chains, which I consider as separate abilities since they can be used at will and in tandem with one another, I do consider crazy slots a single Hatsu, which makes it quite unwieldy to give a proper complexity rating to. The big fuck-off carbine is pure conjuration, as it most likely fires off conjured bullets and would be a very high level 1 by itself. The scythe, apart from using basic conjuration, most likely includes emission and/or enhancement to make it powerful enough to cut at such an extended range without even making physical contact. It relying on categories not optimal for a conjurer makes sense, since, as stated earlier, the scythe can only be used in the form of the rather unwieldy silent waltz. I'd put it at a 3. The mace or wand, I've no idea. Don't even get me started. If it was indeed in some way responsible for his resurrection by emitting his soul or mind into a new body, which would be his opposite category, or somehow transmuting it and possibly conjuring a new body, or manipulating the queen into giving birth to him, yeah, I'm not even gonna go there. I'm 99% sure that even Togashi doesn't have a proper answer for that one. Whatever this ability is, it could go anywhere from level 2 to a level 10. As things stand, I'd put Crazy Slots anywhere between a 5 and a 10. Yeah, let's now cover Yokotani and his Hatsu, a battle of wits, LSDF. It's a defensive ability that allows Yokotani to conjure a number of Nen beasts in the form of puppet soldiers to disarm and expel anyone identified as an intruder in an area specifically designated as Morena's hideout, on the condition that the ability can only be activated if she's physically present somewhere within it. The activation condition rests on an even more advanced mechanic of conjuration, namely territory creation, which we'll talk about in a bit, but since Yokotani isn't the one creating the territory, it doesn't add to his ability's complexity, only its potency and effectiveness. Now, an important aspect of the ability I need to bring up is that the soldiers are invulnerable. Invulnerability effects are tricky, since it's difficult to pin down exactly how this effect is made possible. As in, are Yokotani's soldiers conceptually invulnerable, in that damage as a concept simply does not apply to them, or are they functionally invulnerable, in that the limitations applied to them simply make them so durable that nothing is realistically able of damaging them? See, if they're functionally invulnerable, that's best explained through the fact that the durability of a conjured entity is directly proportional to the Nen user's skill level and potency in conjuration. So by applying appropriate limitations and pledges, that durability can be boosted to such insane levels that, while the conjured entity can technically incur damage and be destroyed, there's nothing that can realistically overwhelm its durability. It makes sense, and I was all aboard with this notion, when at 3 AM, while trying to fall asleep, I suddenly had a flashback of APR shrugging off a point-blank rage blast from post-Rose Meruem like it was nothing. While it's possible its durability is just so high that not even a serious blast from post-Rose Meruem could destroy it, it now more looks like to me like APR is conceptually indestructible. And I'm not really sure how to account for that, since it genuinely sounds like something beyond human capacity, just like a sword that could cut anything would be. Don't get me wrong, APR can still be exorcised, so it's not literally invulnerable, but I really feel like there should be a point, even if it's utterly absurd and nigh untenable by any human, where APR can be destroyed given there's enough aura and power behind it. Just like Uvo could have technically broken out of Pika's chains had he been physically stronger, as absurd as that level of strength would have needed to be. Again, it is technically possible that not even post-Rose Meruem was enough to put APR down, but I find that level of functional durability to be unfathomable. Nonetheless, since I can't account for conceptual durability, nor do I think it possible under Nen as a power system, I will have to view conjured objects with these kinds of effects as simply being functionally durable to such insane levels that only the heaviest of heavy hitters on the Dark Continent may be able to physically destroy them. To get back to Yokotani before I forget, all in all, I'd rate LSDF at a baseline level 3, since, as I said, limitations do not add to to a Hatsu's complexity. Then we have Knuckle and his Hakoware. Listen guys, I've talked about this in the past. His ability is very weird. Even though it's not perfect, I still maintain that it's an emission-based but conjuration-facilitated ability, for reasons that would take way too long to get into here. If you are interested in me breaking down the ability and going into all the aspects of it that make it borderline nonsensical, leave a comment, and if there's enough interest, I promise to tackle it soon in a separate video, and then we can have a proper discussion about it in the comments. For now, the fact that it is a conjured and manipulated Nen beast puts Hakoware at a baseline level 3, its emission-based aura transference effect, which is itself a level 3 mechanic, puts it around a 5, and finally its manipulation-based effect, which I've not properly named yet but consider a mid-level mechanic of manipulation, to induce Zetsu, puts it at a level 7. Next, we have Flutter and his conjured satellite dragonflies, each of which is a conjured and manipulated Nen beast capable of transmitting visual input to Flutter. Allow me to remind you here that if they are identical, the amount of conjured and manipulated objects or Nen beasts does not add to a Hatsu's complexity, i.e. a Hatsu's level. The number of dragonflies Flutter could conjure and control at a time would have been contingent on his aura output, force, and accuracy. Now, as conjured Nen beasts that have enormous range, the dragonflies obviously utilize conjuration, manipulation, and emission. However, apart from using it to maintain their form so far away from Flutter, emission would also be used to transmit visual input to him, which would be a form of property transference, an advanced mechanic of aura transference, and a baseline level 4 mechanic of emission. All in all, I'd say this puts the dragonflies at a surprisingly high level 6. I've already covered Biscuit's Cookie-chan in the previous video about transmutation, so suffice to say that Cookie-chan is a conjuration-facilitated, but primarily transmutation-based ability, which, due to its multi-categorical complexity, would have to be ranked at a level 9 minimum. Adding this just in case. Make no mistake though, the conjuration aspect of Cookie-chan is at a level 3, the standard minimum for a conjured Nen beast. The final user of conjured Nen beasts I'll cover is Ebengane and his exorcism ability, which allows him to conjure a Nen beast to devour and temporarily neutralize an opponent's ability. A very strange aspect of Abe's exorcism is that the ritual he performs draws aura from the surrounding flora and fauna, thereby empowering his exorcism, which would be a form of temporary aura transference, a level 3 emission-based mechanic. Now, exorcism is difficult to properly measure, since it's an effect that doesn't seem to be inherent to any particular category, though manipulation and emission do seem like the most intuitive choices. In this case specifically, I'd put it as an advanced application of manipulation, where what's manipulated is not aura, but a Hatsu, specifically another's Hatsu. In Abe's case, this manipulation effect manifests as the neutralization of a curse-like Hatsu, such as Genthru's countdown. However, the weird thing about this exorcism is that it doesn't actually exorcise, merely contains. The ability, and therefore the Nen beast that consumed it, will therefore remain until the user of the ability dies or the conditions for its removal have been satisfied. Hence why Ebengane had to go out of his way to find and touch Genthru while saying I caught the bomber. If it involved actual exorcising like Hina's ability, I'd assume emission was being used to slowly siphon off the aura from the ability until it breaks down completely. Honestly, I expected more from the only extreme rated conjurer. All in all, due to its aura transference and Hatsu manipulation, which would have to be around a level 6 innate mechanic of manipulation, I'd rate Abe's Nen beast facilitated exorcism at a solid 8, which makes sense for someone ranked so high on the proficiency chart. From Nen beast conjuration, we move on to a more innately complex subset of conjuration abilities I'm terming territory creation. Now, don't mistake this for extra spatial creation, the likes of Nov's four-dimensional mansion, which we will talk about next. Territory creation is a subset of conjuration abilities that hasn't been directly showcased, and entails a conjurer designating a particular space as their own, thereby imbuing it with special properties. This can, for example, serve to make the walls of a marked space durable enough that a powerful enhancer and swordmaster like Nobunaga can't cut through them. That's about the extent of what we've seen, but it's fair to assume assume that territory creation could create numerous other effects, such as blocking matter phasing or other emission-based means of teleportation, provide a boost to those designated as allies, facilitate more powerful effects via landmine or barrier-type abilities, and so on. For example, Yokotani used a territory designated by either Morena or another of their murder flock as a condition for his own ability, making it significantly more potent than it otherwise would have been. Maybe it's this condition that made the invulnerability effect of his soldiers possible, for example. As a baseline, I'd put territory creation at a low level 3. From imbuing already existing physical space with supernatural properties, we move on to actually conjuring it with extra spatial creation. This baseline level 4 mechanic of conjuration allows its users to not designate but create spaces to which they can attach specific rules or through which they can facilitate effects by implementing other categories, in the same way conjured objects or Nen beasts do. If you think level 4 feels a bit low for this, I thought so too, but it has to be designated at a 4. Nov was able to conjure a mansion-sized space with minimal restrictions, and since he's an emitter with conjuration as his opposite category, the highest possible conjuration-based ability with regards to level he could develop would cap out at 4. Remember, while imitations and pledges do not make an ability more complex, they can allow an end user to create complex abilities they'd normally lack aptitude for, at a proportional risk. But since hide and seek exhibits light limitations at best and seemingly zero risk, despite the 21 different rooms and scope of the mansion, it's clear that it was created without Nov needing to overly strain his aptitude for and skill in conjuration. I've already talked about hide and seek proper in the emission video, so I'll stop here. Another use of this conjuration ability mechanic would be Chitu's unnamed Hatsu. It allowed him to create a Savannah-inspired extra-dimensional space with the attached condition that his opponent had to catch him within a span of 8 hours, or suffer the consequences. Since the consequences were never revealed, as not even Chitu was aware of them, having attained the ability through Poof's assistance, I can't properly rate the Hatsu itself, so it's at a 4, just like the ability mechanic itself. Finally, we move on to the last and by far most advanced application of conjuration: hybridization. So this one's kind of cheating, as it's the first and probably only mechanic I consider primarily innate to a specific category, namely conjuration, that inherently must rely on another to manifest, namely transmutation. As in, while Nen beasts, for example, require manipulation in order to properly function, you can technically create a Nen beast and have it T-pose your enemies to death, while hybridization necessitates transmutation. This conjuration/transmutation mechanic allows a Nen user to merge the properties of two different things to create a hybridized version of them. Think abilities like Tsubone's Rider's High or Heinrich's Biohazard. Rider's High, Perfect Girl, 7 transformations, allows Tsubone to transform herself into, presumably, 7 different vehicles, out of which we've seen the bike and the glider. I've already explained this in the transmutation video, but to reiterate, while it was omitted from the Viz translation, in chapter 329, it was outright stated that Tsubone conjures various vehicle parts and integrates them within her body. As such, body/object malleability, a level 4 transmutation-based mechanic, works together with conjuration-based object creation or Nen Beast conjuration to create a mechanic with emergent properties significantly more complex than either are individually. In Tsubone's case specifically, she uses body malleability to mold her body around the conjured vehicle parts, and in such a complex way to see them form a coherent whole, while not accidentally killing herself in the process. Remember, under all that, she's still got muscles, bones, organs, everything. It's all just reshaped in such a way so as to allow her to perform both the functions of a living person, such as thinking, speaking, and presumably breathing, and that of a vehicle simultaneously. By the way, the limitation that she must have a rider provide aura in order to move, making Rider's High a symbiotic type, is probably there to lessen the load on her Nen memory and compensate for the fact that she can turn into 7 different vehicles, which is incredibly flexible. All in all, I'd put Rider's High as well as the baseline level of hybridization as a mechanic at a strong 7. Finally, at the very very end, we have Heinrich and his Biohazard. Biohazard is whack for a bunch of reasons, but primarily for the fact that it seemingly allows Heinrich to transform any device he touches into a living animal while retaining the device's properties. To make this not just be a dojo power, I have to imagine that the animals aren't actually alive, but simply beasts in the shape of animals. Furthermore, I simply can't imagine that he can turn any device into any animal, with a more likely scenario that he has to train to turn objects of a specific type into a specific kind of animal. As in, I imagine him undergoing drills specifically to turn various types of firearms into snakes as quickly as possible while maintaining their functionality. Similar to Rider's High, the ability works by implementing the level 4 transmutation mechanic of object malleability to make the object in question, well, malleable, and then conjures the animal-shaped beasts, which by definition use conjuration and manipulation, and integrates one with the other to form a singular whole. Since the hybridized objects can maintain themselves for a time regardless of range, basic emission also has to be utilized. As such, I'd put Biohazard at a very impressive level 9. And that's that. A few notes / observations before I finish up proper. 1. Per the view of Conjuration I've arrived at and adopted throughout this video, conjured objects, entities, or spaces are essentially just mundane without the application of additional abilities. These abilities can be Conjuration-based, like Kite's Conjuration-based Mad Clown conjuring his Conjuration-based Carbine, which fires off what I assume are Conjuration-based bullets, but can, and more often than not are, imbued with abilities inherent to other categories. 2. As stated in the preamble, facilitating an ability through conjured objects, entities, and especially spaces obviously has benefits for conjurers, most likely increasing an ability's force, accuracy, and or rate of acquisition. Otherwise, Kurapika could have simply developed a healing Hatsu without facilitating it through his conjured chain. 3. I avoided talking about conjured doubles, the likes of Hanzo and Castro showcased, since I plan to tackle them in a separate video very soon. 4. I also know I didn't cover Hisoka's Texture Surprise, which was heavily implied to be a Conjuration-based ability, but that was simply because the actual effects of Texture Surprise are very difficult to pin down. It's been retconned at least once, arguably twice, making it a real pain in the rear to deconstruct mechanically. As things stand, a very specific application of object creation paired with the level 3 transmutation-based mechanic of object malleability without it crossing the line into hybridization, which is an emergent property that can but needn't be evoked by these two mechanics, would account for the vast majority of things Texture Surprise has been shown to do, putting it at a low level 4. With all that said, first and foremost, I'd very much like to thank Kamaswami, Matt B, Tom Gnome, Bayanda Mathembu, Nassan, and Loki for going the extra mile in supporting the channel. For long videos like these, which are way too weeby for me to expect any decent viewership, the support is especially appreciated. Oh, speaking of, the Overthinker membership tier will now be getting a swanky new emote, which you can see on your screens now. A very talented friend of mine, who's a graphic designer by trade, made it and is open for commissions in case you've been looking to get something done. His link is in the description. As always, thank you very much for watching, your feedback is always appreciated, subscribe if you'd like more content like this, and I'll see you in the next one.